Well, it's wonderful to have some of you join me today. It seems like some great people from my past lives on the webinar today, which is wonderful. So as I prepared for today, I was kind of told that everybody probably had a little varied background. So I'm going to try to touch on a few things and put the pieces together for the majority of the people. But I did want to introduce our team here for the Center for Rural Enterprise Engagement. And I am Laurie Baker. I'm the agricultural communications person. I'm an associate professor here at Kansas State University. And we have our extension specialist, Dr. Cheryl Boyer, and Dr. Hikaru Peterson, who is our ag economist. She was at Kansas State University when we started our center, but is now at the University of Minnesota. And we still meet weekly and collaborate on grants and research together, as well as our extension efforts together. So we really have built this as a foundation for touching on all pieces of the land grant mission. So we do conduct research in this area. We also kind of take that to the people, and I would say this type of webinar is the way that we do that. Certainly other activities throughout the state and throughout the country as well. But in general, we work to be a generator of knowledge related to new media marketing, and also help rural agricultural businesses and rural communities flourish. We really found when we started the center that there was a real need to kind of help agriculturalists understand the communication side, particularly related to new media communication and online technologies. They were really good at their business, but they didn't understand how to integrate that and move that into an online environment and kind of share their stories on a larger level. So we try to offer some hands-on experience in the middle, research experience, teaching experience. We bring our students into our efforts through having interns, as well as in recent years, they've been extremely helpful as we've developed. Our three most recent research projects have involved students either in the coding or the development, or in some cases the participants of the studies. So we have appreciated having that perspective, and that allows us, they're seeing some of these new tools faster than we are. So if we can kind of get a pulse as to what's coming next, they often are the people that can do that for us. So today, though, I really want to talk about measuring, and some of these pieces are something you likely have heard a lot, but I find even myself needs a refresher sometimes on why we're doing this and why it matters. So it's also a big topic, and I know lots of us have other responsibilities and other jobs, and we're thinking, my goodness, do I also have to measure all of the things? And so one of the things that I really hope to convey in this webinar today is that while measuring is really important, measuring what you can measure to be the most impactful is what matters. So if you can be consistent with those things over time, that is more valuable than only haphazardly measuring a ton of different metrics, instead focusing on the ones that you can handle. So really measuring certainly starts with planning for the end. So as the chess strategy here, really picking a strategy of where you want to be when you're done. So creating those measures that are the most useful for you and for your organization. And when I say for you, there may be some things that you're measuring that are really just for you to help improve. And then there are some things that you may be measuring that you need to report to bosses or to boards or to other types of stakeholders. And those things may or may not look the same, because sometimes as communicators, we may get really caught up in a count that matters to us, whereas it's not maybe a count that matters to somebody else. So I have an example here of a measurable objective. So beginning with those solid measurable objectives. So the example here is increase audience engagement by 20% over the next month or over the next quarter. At our center, we really measure quarterly. We find the big measurement, that's about as often as we can do some really in-depth analysis and reporting. We certainly are looking weekly at just what's provided on our dashboard to kind of see how things went. But as far as intense measuring, every quarter is what makes sense for us. And that also kind of aligns with the times that granting agencies are measuring and that sort of thing, so that we're developing those types of reports for multiple uses, not just for one use. So that also makes your measuring more useful to you if you're able to use it for more than just one thing. Some people do only measure annually, but a lot changes in a year, as you know. So if you can even make it happen every 6 months for some in-depth analysis, that could be helpful. So in this example here, the objective is to increase over the next month or the next quarter. So then you would not only evaluate whether you met that metric or not, but evaluate if that was an effective metric. Perhaps 20% was too much of an increase. I find it's often better to under-promise and over-deliver. So if you feel like you're from a starting point where you want to double engagement, that's a great internal goal to have. But for those that maybe you're publishing to a boss or to a board that may not understand how achievable that piece is, maybe it's better to start with a 5% increase or a 10% increase, one that you know you can meet pretty solidly. And then you can actually report, you know what, we said we were going to increase by 5% over the next quarter, but we increased by 20. And so that certainly makes your impact a lot stronger. So looking at how, I'm going to give you some examples of how we choose what to measure and what makes the most sense for us, and then some that are kind of the most recommended to report, and take what works for you and leave what doesn't work for you. As all of these things kind of go, it has to be a personal situation. But again, quarterly updates are what really work for us. Those of you who have boards, if your board is meeting quarterly, then that's a great opportunity for them to be used to getting those reports and knowing, okay, great, we're going to have a quarterly report on how we're doing on some of our key performance indicators. Or if they're only meeting annually, maybe you do a large report annually, and then maybe each month you're tracking for your own personal use and collecting that data along the way. I think one of the most important things to think about is we are all doing a ton of different things all the time. So the more we can use some of the existing tools, the easier this will be and the less time we will have to spend working on these things. So as you're choosing metrics to measure, I think the ones that matter the most are probably the easiest ones for you to collect, because then you know for a fact, even if I'm running short on time, that metric is one that I know exactly where to pull. I've pulled it every single month, and I can just put the new ones in at the very end. Also, consistently measuring the same metrics. As you're downloading information and you're looking more in depth, those are all great experiences, but thinking about what you can actually continue to measure over a long period of time. And maybe that is one measurement per platform, and that is going to be your key performance indicator every quarter for the next year, and then you add another one. I remember when I worked for Texas Wheat, gosh, from 2003 to early 2007, I was always upset that my boss kept telling me to do less. And that just seems like a terrible thing for somebody that was just out of college and so excited to do so many things. But I will say in my life now, I recognize why he was telling me to do less, because every time you do more, people expect you to do even more the next time, not just keep the status quo. And I think metrics are something we can get buried in pretty quickly. And if we're reporting back to a board or a boss or something like that, or an organization, if you've reported that measure once, they're going to want to see it again. And they may, in fact, look back and think, oh, well, we must have gone down, or they would have reported this information. It looks like I see a chat. Let me see what we have here. Well, it seems like I could see that chat, I thought. Maybe because I'm in full screen mode, it took me away. Feel free to interrupt me to come in with information too, because I can't.
Lori, it was just Angie letting people know they could share their questions in the
Oh,
chat and we will address them.
great. Thank you. Glad that you were able to do that. For some reason, I was unable to see that. But yes, please jump in. Feel free to interrupt me. Ask your questions along the way. I'll also leave some time for questions, answers, and discussion at the end. You may have some ideas for how to do these things too. So great. Thank you for that. Also continuing to think about those next steps. So as you're saying, these are the metrics that I'm going to always measure. Maybe you even have a plan for, okay, next quarter or next year, these are the metrics I'm going to add. Maybe you're choosing to only do it for one platform, and then you'll increase those over time to include more when you feel like you're ready to do it and have the support and the ability to continue to provide that. I know few years ago, probably quite a few years ago, I heard the gentleman from the Truffle Media Group speak at Ag Media Summit. And remember, he said, just pick one new thing at a time and do it for 2 weeks and decide if you like it and if you're going to continue it, but don't try to learn all of the things all at the same time. And that's something that's really kind of stuck with me, is we can only do so much. So doing one thing at a time is the easiest for us to wrap our brains around it. So let's look at a few terms. I know many of you are actively involved in this world, but I just want to make sure we're on the same page before I specifically talk about which things we recommend to measure for each platform, to make sure that we all know what we're talking about. So a little bit of terminology here. As we're looking at the total counts on platforms, these are the complete count of all users that saw or engaged with a post. And in this instance, when it says total count, there can be more than one count for a single user. So this is also the place where if you like your page or if you're watching one of your videos, you may be watching it multiple times, or you may be viewing it multiple times, and those counts are going to be in there. So these tend to look a little bit higher and are a little more manipulable than some of the others, whereas the unique users number is a single count for each person. So again, depending on what you're trying to do, whether you're in more of a public relations world or not, you know, you may want those total counts, but that might not really be telling you how many unique users are seeing your information. There may just be one person that's seeing it a bunch of times, which certainly has value for things that are education oriented as well. I don't know what happened there. There we go. Total reach. The tab came in wrong. Total reach is the total number of people who see the content. And again, those are unique users. And then organic reach are the number of people who saw the post in their news feed, ticker, on the page's timeline, without being paid. So it wasn't a promoted post. It wasn't an advertisement. It was an organic reach that you came about naturally. Impressions are simply the number of times the content was displayed. Multiple impressions are, again, possible in this one. Oh, sorry. And then we have a total and an organic for each of those impressions as well. So engagement is something that we like to talk about a lot, and it really probably is the epitome of what we're all seeking, right? We want people not to just have our content on their page or on their news feed, but to actually engage with it. So engagement happens when they post, they click a link, they share, they write a comment, and with Facebook Insights specifically, engagement is defined as post clicks, likes, shares, and comments. Each platform calls these something a little bit different, of course. And then the lifetime is the total actions since the time that content was posted. So that obviously can grow over time, particularly if it's a post that is maybe seasonal and next year you're sharing that again, or people are finding it again, depending on your platform. So I've broken this down into the top few things that we really recommend you should report from a few platforms. I'm going to talk about Facebook, I'm going to talk about Twitter, and I'm going to talk about YouTube, but these are certainly transferable in some cases across platform. And as Instagram's looking more and more like Facebook, some of these measurements are now possible there too. But in general, what you should report from Facebook here, it does depend on your strategy, depends on your space, depends on your capacity, and certainly your key performance indicators. We always want to tie back to those. But these probably go from the easiest to measure / the ones that you should be doing without a doubt that are easier to collect, to the ones that are a little more complicated to collect. So if you had to only choose based on time, maybe you choose the top 3 and then move forward to tracking some of the others later. And I am going to show you some examples of how we share these with different audiences. But number 1, the low-level metrics like total page likes and follows. The reason this is one of those that really matters, while these aren't necessarily engagement, these are things that are transferable to a lot of different audiences. So people like bosses and managers and boards that don't know a lot still understand these terms and they aren't complicated. These are also things that you can get from all of your platforms on your initial page, on that initial Facebook Insights page or an initial other page. So you don't have to dig deep, you don't have to download anything to get those. So those are pretty simple to keep tracking over time and you can always have on hand. Engagement rate, that certainly reaches to the heart of what we're wanting to do. And it is a metric that is a little more understandable for general people to think, yes, engagement is important. And again, this is becoming something that Facebook is now providing on some of those initial reports as opposed to having to download it. Now, if you're wanting to make comparisons of post type with engagement rate, you will have to download the data, but just regular engagement rate for post is available. Reach is something, again, that depending on your audience, that may be a metric they're used to seeing if they've put out advertisements in a newspaper before or on a radio program. Those are things they may be used to seeing and are comparable for them across other media types. So reach can be an important piece. Also looking at those impressions is important. So how many times you really reach the people with your information and they had the opportunity to engage with that in some way. Tracking your target audiences is something that's always important. I mean, we know that as communicators, so it's something that's valuable for us to be able to say, did we track that information to the correct people, or are we mostly reaching people in India when our target audience is in Kansas or within the United States? Another thing that we really like to do is save positive comments and some of that qualitative data. So 1 through 5 here are really quantitative data. They're the numbers that sometimes our business offices like to see. But saving some of those qualitative pieces, if somebody wrote a really great review for you, or somebody put a positive comment about the impact that your work is making, those are the types of things that are really great to save and collect. They look visual within a report, and you're able to kind of give some context to the things that you're talking about. So saving those can take a little bit more time and a little bit more file management, but on an emotional level, those things can really connect with bosses and boards and people that aren't as familiar with the number pieces. Although I will have some examples of how you can share those pieces with people so they can understand the value as well. So now let's look at what we can report from YouTube. Again, my caveat there depends on your strategy, your space, and your KPIs. But again, that initial number one are the low level metrics, like your total views. People are used to seeing those types of things. People kind of know what that means. And it's very easy for you to collect that data from that very initial analysis page or analytics page, excuse me. The second thing that's important for you to track is really looking at your watch time. And often people aren't diving that deep into it. They really are just reporting those total views, but the total views can really be deceiving. People may only be watching, in fact, are likely only watching the first couple of minutes of your video, and that will help you make some strategic recommendations or decisions on how long your videos should be in the future. So if you notice a trend, and a typical trend is that people are trailing off after the first 1.5 to 2 minutes, people that stick around for 5 minutes, it has to be an impressive amount of content that you have to really get to that point. And so you may be able to make some recommendations, particularly if you're working with other people who think videos should be longer, to really say, how about we break up this 10-minute video into 5 2-minute videos? And then people are more likely to watch multiple videos. It also increases your available content without really increasing too much work or too much effort, besides having to put in front-loaded and post-loaded templates. But also looking at where your traffic is coming from. So how are they finding you on YouTube? And that can really help you improve some of your SEO and understand what search terms people are looking for, and also what avenues they're finding you from. YouTube also provides a lot more demographic information than some other platforms. Now that does depend on how much information is filled out in somebody's profile, but they do allow you a lot more access to that type of information than Facebook does. So paying attention to those demographics and seeing how they align with the demographics of your organization or your target audience can be something that's really impressive to a boss, to say, you know what, maybe we have higher numbers in our in-person meetings, but really the age group that we're looking for, we're reaching them better on our YouTube channel. So could we put more effort into that? And certainly as you're looking at the return on your investment, you may get more bang for your buck from that. Subscriber rates are also something important to pay attention to. You know, these are your key people. Are they following you? I've seen a lot of really cool things done lately, encouraging people to subscribe in kind of a more fun way than I think we've seen in the past. Before, it's been a lot of hardcore salesmanship, and instead I've seen a lot of front ends and end caps to videos that are more welcoming people to engage in the conversation, to make sure they don't miss the next event, even having some things that are kind of funny or innovative to ask people to subscribe and come back to your channel. And again, if your videos are shorter, you have more opportunity to include those types of things. This is also another area where you can save some of those positive comments that can really indicate how valuable your content is from your users. So keeping track of those and saving those is helpful. And of course, those are also all saved for you on the platform, so you can go back and collect them. It's just easier if you're collecting them on a regular basis, so you're not overwhelmed when that annual report or the quarterly report is due. All right, so let's look quickly at Twitter here, and then I'll show you some examples of what our reports look like to kind of help some audiences that don't understand these metrics. Again, kind of the same process, depends on your strategy and your KPIs, but those low-level metrics of total tweets and total followers, there's no reason not to report those because they're so available and easy to grab and keep up with. Engagement rates, again, we're all looking for that engagement. In Twitter, you can also track your Twitter keywords. You do have to obviously establish those ahead of time, but that's a way that you can really track some of your key concepts, like the name of your brand, if there's specific hashtags that you're using, those types of things that would track over time that you could really measure related to campaign performance as well as related to overall performance within a quarter or within a year. You can also look at some of your growth trends. So, are we seeing an increase in engagement rates? Are we seeing an increase in the use of our Twitter keywords? To look at those on a larger scale. Hashtag performance is also another thing that you can track over time, particularly if you have a specific campaign that you're tracking or a specific emoji that you're tracking. There are a lot of opportunities for that. And in Twitter, in all of your platforms, you can certainly calculate your return on investment. In Twitter, I feel like they make it a little bit easier for you to track this return on investment. They have a lot of that data available to you. So it's not as difficult to track as it is in some of the other platforms, but we still often report it in some of the other platforms too. This is another place that you can certainly keep qualitative data. I feel like you can see those in reports and those are exciting, but you don't have as much depth sometimes to those reports. So without some context, it's not quite as easy to understand some of those pieces. All right, so what I did here for Let's Take a Look is I pulled one of the reports that we've done for one of our clients and kind of blocked out some information, just so you can see how some of this information can be conveyed to some audiences who aren't familiar with these terms and may not understand this. So this right here is an example table of contents for one of the reports that we've done recently. So again, thinking about which things you could focus on if this is the first time you're providing a report like this to your board or to your boss, or including it in something you're doing for a job search. Maybe you don't want all of these things because, again, they will expect them over and over again. But maybe these are things that you're tracking for yourself, and then you're only reporting a few of them until you see what works and what people are asking for. You will notice that this report here is 32 pages long. So that also might be a bit overwhelming for some people. So thinking about your audience and the group you're working with and what makes the most sense, maybe starting with a one-pager that's front and back, maybe the nice first step, and then building on that as your board, your boss, your organization becomes more familiar with these terms and understands them, because presenting a report like this would certainly take more like a full hour to maybe an hour and a half. And if you're only given 15 minutes to provide what you've done over the last quarter, you may have to condense that. But this is an example of some of those things. So again, tracking some of these basic things over a period of time will allow you to kind of show some growth. Again, we typically report in quarter for our center, and some of our clients do it more like every 6 months or every year. But this is a nice way for you to kind of look at some of your key performers and to see some of the growth over time. These are the titles of these pieces. And in this case here, we have literally just pulled some of the top performing posts and put them over a period of time with the overall views. So this wasn't too complicated to pull. There's enough detail for you to know what the posts were about, but we didn't necessarily go back and do a lot of the in-depth analysis into themes or anything like that. So this is something that you could pull really quickly, would be visual for people to see for the first time. But we also have things that get in a little more in depth, and something that we have added in our most recent reports are these terminology sections. And so I would venture to say at least every other page in our current reports defines the technology or defines the terminology, excuse me, that we're using on that page. We find that this is helpful even for pretty experienced users to see what these things mean. And even those of us who are looking at these pretty regularly, it's nice to be like, okay, wait a minute, what was the difference between these numbers that we've kind of pulled out? So again, if this is something that you're measuring every quarter, people could put it side by side with a comparison of what happened with the last quarter and be prepared that, okay, this is how we're thinking about sharing this information. So here, this page, we've looked at impressions, engagements, and engagement rate. So I would say this is probably an initial maybe where you might start with some of the basic pieces. And then we've also added into ours some text, not just the numbers, so that there is some follow-up information with that and some observations that we saw along the way. This is another way that we've broken up some of these. Again, here we have some terminology defined. In this case, we did break these up more qualitatively into the types of informational posts, or the types of posts that were done. They weren't all informational, clearly, looking at some lifestyle posts, brand image and culture, and really putting them into play related to their classification. We often always tie these to the engagement rates, as you've kind of seen down here too. So not only how many did they have with that, but how many we were really getting engagement for. And this may be a place where you're tracking these things initially before you feel like you're ready to show that to somebody else, particularly if you aren't sure that these are going to go up in your next report. We never want to make it look like we've gone down unless we have a reason for that happening. We also typically provide an estimated earned media value, which I think helps people understand these in more business-like terms, because that's something people are used to hearing is, okay, but what kind of dollars are we looking at for this? And in many cases, this client here, they weren't paying to promote any of these. So these were all organic impressions. So if they're able to kind of look and see, okay, this is the true value we're getting of this information, they might be more willing to hire you an intern, or willing to put a little bit more money into this, as opposed to the other platforms where they're used to seeing, okay, this is a dollar amount for this piece versus what we've seen against radio or against other types of traditional media. So including those types of information that are really transferable to other business goals is helpful. Again, we do a very similar thing with the Facebook piece. So you can pull out these that are the most important to you. And again, remember, these weird bars are not really here. They're just to kind of block the content to keep the client's information concealed. But looking at more terminology defined, we found that to be really helpful, looking at what post impressions are, engagement rate. But again, you could break this down to, if you said you were only going to do engagement rate, you could develop something that just has engagement rate and recommendations for that and what that means tied to your target audience. We've also started doing more posts on negative feedback and what that piece means. Again, maybe that's something more internally that you want that information before you figure that. Certainly, we did a post recently on our blog about negative feedback, and sometimes that's not always a bad thing. That tracks often with your highest performing posts have the most negative feedback. So if you're doing a good job, somebody's always angry. So it isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is something you may want to track and pay attention to. And again, here we have done some qualitative analysis of putting these posts into different content areas and then calculating the engagement rate related to those so we can make some recommendations. We find these are extremely helpful for places where you have multiple people managing accounts, and there's one person that always thinks like, people of course want to hear our lifestyle posts all the time. That's what they care about. They care about us. And then when you pull the numbers and you're like, well, not really. Really what they're caring about more is this educational content. So that way you can come up with a strategy that makes sense for the entire group instead of based on one person's feelings about what should be posted. Obviously, providing demographics can be really impressive for groups and is something that people understand. So they are able to kind of look at that information and know, okay, this is what it means and this is how we can interpret based on what locations make the most sense as well. So this image here is to remind me to say, I know this looks like a lot, but the goal is really to start with what you can do. And maybe that's a very small seed right now. And you're, again, just looking at engagement rate on all the platforms and measuring that one thing. And it could be a front and back report that you provide. Maybe you provide it electronically, maybe you don't print it, but kind of plant the seed and start that. And as we know in agriculture, that can grow into something really great over time. And again, making that time for what matters. It really doesn't have to be as much time as you may think. If you're collecting this data a little bit every week, a little bit more every month, and really set some weekly and monthly priorities and start with what's manageable. That may be one thing, that may be two things, and then add more as you're ready and able to do that and grow in your confidence for doing that. Certainly the templates for your reports, once you get that set up the first time, it's pretty easy to plug in the numbers the next time. So it's one of those things that may take a lot of time on the front end, but on the back end can be a pretty smooth process, and you can have other people help you with that. It's certainly okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask for help within your office. There may be other people that have experience and want to help you with those things, or can gather some of the lower level things. You know, it's a great experience for an intern to start to learn to grab some of those basic metrics and put those into an Excel file for you, or download them regularly and look at them and give you some of that data. We also have opportunities where we're happy to help with things. So our 2019 Insight Summit is coming up, and we will do a lot more on analytics, pretty focused on different types of analytics this year, with an intro, a medium, and an advanced kind of analytics, and looking at those types of things. So if you are available and would like to join us, that is here in Manhattan, February 12th and 13th. And it is just an investment of $199 until January 1. So we've tried really hard to kind of keep the price pretty low. It does jump after the first of the year there. So, and you're certainly welcome to reach out to us and continue learning with us. We have our online learning resource at ruleengagement.org. That's also where you can sign up to register for our Insight Summit. And you can join our community on Facebook and continue this conversation, or embark on other conversations we have related to measuring and understanding new and social media. So with that, I think I have left 18 minutes or so for us to have some discussion. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, or hear if there are things that are working for you that I didn't mention today.
Hi, Lori, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi. Yeah, actually, of course, I'm driving now, so I can't see if there's any questions or not, but typically we do only go till 2:45, so.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I had written down 30 to 45 minutes to present and then 10 minutes for questions. So I guess I wrote that down
No,
wrong.
but you're fine. I'm sorry. No, you're fine if it went over. I'm sorry. I just wanted you to know you didn't have to stay until 3, so.
Okay. Good to know.
So, does anybody have any questions? I highly recommend that boot camp that she was talking about. Some of my colleagues and I from the Animal Science Department went last year, and it was a great conference, and we learned lots. I mean, kind of she gave us the basics today, but there's so much more that they really get more in depth in at that boot camp. So if you can come to Manhattan in February, we'd love to see you there.
Yeah, that would be great. We would love to see you. And we do try to give some time to work. Like, these are a bit of big questions that it takes some time to work through and think through.
Does anybody have any questions?
No.
Well, we appreciate everybody being on here today. We're trying a different time to kind of see what kind of participation we would have. So let the board know, or Jennifer and I know what you think about doing it at different times of the day. We'll start promoting the December coffee and collaboration soon, and we'll get this recording edited and we'll get it posted and shared on Facebook here in the next day or so. So thank you, Lori, for sharing your knowledge with all of us. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know it's a busy time on campus right now with wrapping up classes and kids enrolling for next year and that sort of thing. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, and hope everybody has a great holiday week next week, and we'll talk to y'all next week or next month.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining, everyone. Bye.